Greetings from a fishing village on the Atlantic coast. You've tuned in to podcast Port Wen, celebrating the world of Doc Martin unofficially. I'm Chesley Wexler, and we'll be discussing Doc Martin, the medicine, the mayhem, and the marvelous people of Port Wen. We're ready to discuss Best Medicine Season 1, Episode 7, There Might Be Blood, with our unspoiled Best Medicine fans. Before we start, a little public service announcement. If you're enjoying Podcast Port Wen, please like the episode and subscribe to the feed. Leave comments on what's working and what's not, things that you'd be interested in seeing. There are people in at least 10 different countries who are tuning in, so I really appreciate your support. For tonight, let's welcome back Doug and Erica. Come through and welcome back to Podcast Port Wen.
Hello.
Good to see you guys.
Good evening.
Hello. So I think we started with Erica last time on overview and what you liked and what you think about the episode. Doug, why don't we start with you for your overall impression?
Overall, I really enjoyed it.
Good.
I wanted to watch it the second time. I got halfway through the second time tonight. I think there was good interaction with Martin and Louisa, right? So they've got a thing, but they don't want to, let each other know their thing. And I thought that Elaine's connection with, I forget who her beau wannabe is, but,
Al.
I thought that connection was evolving nicely and going in the direction I think we all thought it would go.
Sure.
So that
sure.
was nice.
Cool. What did you think, Erica?
I really enjoyed the fact that it started out with Elaine, taking care of the doctor. I thought that was a really sweet moment. It shows, I think, some growth in her, but also a big growth in their connection. It wasn't so much about her. I think she had the one little scene where she was filming something with the blood on her mouth and for her podcast or her posts, but other than that, it really was a toned down Elaine. I agree about the connection with Al. I just thought overall the growth of her the entire episode with everyone she interacted with was quite nice. I love that we're finally getting somewhere with Louisa and the doctor. I think that's some nice little small moments and things. Overall, I'm not a big Halloween-ish, gory. That's not really my thing, but I liked the episode for what it was.
Good. All right. So it sounds like I also liked it. So it sounds like a general liking of this episode. For my personal opinion, it was my favorite so far. I don't know how you guys felt about it in your rankings.
I wouldn't rank it as my favorite, but I only say that because I don't really do the whole, I equate it to Halloween, but like the fake blood and the costumes and the masks and the cobwebs and the spookiness is not really something I enjoy. If you were to take that as not into consideration, I really think this was, character development wise, this was my favorite. I'll say that.
Good. What do you think, Doug?
Yeah, I'm in Erica's camp. Wasn't my favorite. I'm not a big Halloween blood and guts gore kind of guy. My favorite would still be episode number 2 because that was such a snapback from episode 1. So yeah, well, lucky number 7.
Why don't we let's talk about Sally first, Sally Mylow, and we'll work our way up to the relationships that we've got with Martin and Louisa and Al and Elaine. So Sally Mylow, we see her at the doctor's office, in her own shop, and at the Salty Breeze, and then at the end. Doug, you want to tell us what you remember about that and what your thinking is about this crazy pharmacist?
Well, I think Erica may have said it was good character development, and so in one episode, it grew and grew and grew to the point was where she saves the day. So, wow, didn't see that coming.
Yeah,
right. She just seemed to be the sheriff's mother, and that was it. Well, the upset sheriff's mother, right? So you're not hurting my baby.
Yes.
So that was an interesting progression, all in one episode.
Yeah. What do you think, Erica?
I thought their mother-son connection was quite close in nature. that does happen, but I was a little thrown back when and then he's kissing her like 20 times on the cheek, and I was like, wow, that's tight-knit family.
Yeah, it's a little odd.
So he's an odd guy, so that's not necessarily that bizarre of a behavior for him. Kind of liked how she saved the day because I feel like they've kind of portrayed her as a little bit flighty, a little bit, I don't know. Yeah, just a little flighty. And I thought it was nice that she actually could make a connection with the town and the history. I don't know. Were they trying to insinuate that perhaps this was Mark's father?
I had not thought of that.
Saying that they had this steamy affair and, it was all secret. And here he drops everything as supposedly this big writer, and he comes to this tiny little town and immediately just start beelines for her.
And it was 40 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So that the time frame is about right. I hadn't thought of that. That'd be an interesting angle. Let's see. Aunt Sarah. We see a little bit of backstory, I guess, on some Aunt Sarah things. Erica, do you remember the problem that she's got?
Yeah, so looks like she's running out of money or having some funding problems. I couldn't quite tell if the intent is for the inspector, like, does somebody want her license that he's nice enough to warn her? Could there be small town, Joe Schmo down the street wants the lobster license, so giving you the heads
Hmm.
up, like, you better get your stuff in order. Or it could
I
just
don't
be
know
a
how they
friendly,
work. Yeah.
but it was interesting to hear that she, seems to have some, funding problems.
Yeah.
Odd that she doesn't seem like a very private person, that she wouldn't go to Doc Martin to ask for, even a temporary loan or something. She's very close with him. She's been kind of pushing the familial bond, but I guess there might be more to that. I thought it was very brave of her to go, and I cannot remember the gentleman's name, when she threw her back out to get him to help
Yeah.
deliver at the percent. Eddie, is
Yeah.
that it?
Eddie's the guy. He's the woodpecker.
Yeah, and there seems to be some flirtation there. I mean, we saw it a little bit in the baseball episode, but this
Hmm.
one seemed to be, obviously they have a very close connection if she can confide in him over her own nephew.
Yeah, so he's the same guy from the baseball
Hmm.
connection?
Yeah. It's a little love-hate thing going on there, it seems, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wouldn't be seen dead with you, but, sometimes we'll make out, I
That's
guess.
right. Yeah, we'll
Weird.
jump in the sack, but yeah, yeah. But we're deadly enemies.
Well, but she
Clearly,
did it.
he's
Sorry, I was just going to say, throughout the episode and previous episodes, she refers to him as a pecker and he always corrects her. It's woodpecker. But at the
mhm,
very end of the episode, when they finally were done and he wasn't going to take any money, she called him by his real name.
right. Yes.
So I thought that was a big moment.
And his reaction was, "Yes." Right? Yeah. So he's definitely, he's very interested because he's like, "I would help you for free if you just let me take you to dinner."
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it is interesting that she's low on cash, so she's struggling a bit as a businesswoman, and Martin is not the first person she wants to go to. Now, she certainly doesn't want him medically to think that she has any issues and that she needs to depend on him for anything. Well, it seems like this may also translate into financial as well.
Right.
Yeah. And she did eventually go to Martin, but all she wanted a cortisone shot, like just give me a cortisone shot. Yeah. But I don't think she wants to be dependent on him for money. How
Al
about go ahead.
Although when it comes to money, we don't see anyone ever processing any forms or payment in that office. It's just the people come in, they get their stuff, and they leave, and somehow he makes money. We don't
Magically
know
gets
how.
paid. Yep.
Right.
It looks
They have
like they've
great
made a
insurance.
creative choice to not cover the whole insurance angle.
The town
Which
has great insurance. That's it.
but even something along the lines of eventually maybe we'll see Elaine process a form just to give us a sense that something's happening. How about you talked about Elaine and Al?
I thought it was a great evolving moment for Elaine, or moments, I should say. We saw very little of her erratic character that just wants to be popular on podcasts and post social media posts. That was not central. She, the whole entire thing started with her protecting Doc and not even wanting to say that she was doing it, as she's trying to keep him inside but not say why. And
Hmm.
I thought that was a lovely growth moment for the two of them. And then he let her and didn't, poke fun or anything like that. And then with Al, there was a big development there, when she's sitting there saying she's not changing her mind and she's going to leave Portland and this can't happen. And then they have this tender moment, while they're tied up together at a horror show.
Right, right. Doug, what were you thinking about when she was going on her whole, I'm leaving and I've told you all this and
Yeah, it's all a front. She knows she likes him.
yeah, yeah,
But she is highly motivated to leave, right? I think she wants to make it bigger than Port Went can make her. But he seems like a sweet guy, right? How can you not root for him, right?
yeah,
You want him to be successful, and he's sweet. He's doing all the right things. Hopefully, she'll come around.
yeah. What did you think of how Al was handling it, Erica?
He is typical cool guy. I can't really show too much of my emotions. He lets it slip every now and then, but I think he's made it very clear to everyone that if she would, he would. So he kind of takes the back seat, and I think that's really brave of somebody to have, we'll call it a crush, on somebody, and knowing that they need the space and time and being mature enough to give it to them is pretty big, and he is still pretty young, so to have that mentality is is impressive.
Yeah. That scene made me laugh because it was clearly Elaine talking to herself, right? Because Al's like, "Yep, you told me. I get it. Yeah, you said that." And she's the one who just has to keep defending her position, even though no one is attacking her position because her own emotions are attacking her position, right? Which kind of leads us into our other big romance of the main romance of the thread. Although we could do a little segue into how do you think Mark does with respect to this episode? What'd you think of Mark, Doug?
Well, he's just too weird,
Okay.
right? I can't identify with him. He's just too out there and too wackadoo. So not really my favorite either.
I think my opinion of him, seeing him, is he is. I'm fine with him at this point. I kind of get him. He's a goofball, and not necessarily because he's trying to be a goofball, but I think he's not the sharpest tool in the shed and a goofball.
Well, well, as his mother said, he's a lot smarter than his grades would, show.
Yeah.
Like, that's interesting.
Yeah. Is he? But he is sweet, I think. And he's just a goofball. I mean, I don't know if you even noticed. I didn't notice till a second viewing, but when he's in Doc's office at the beginning getting checked for his rash, and Doc comes out and he's talking to Elaine, Mark's in there blowing up a glove,
Dude.
right? Which is just a childish thing to do. You figure somebody who's, 17, 18, 21, 22, college maybe, goofing around might do that. That's just Mark. He's just going to be that kind of guy.
I kind of got that sense because I couldn't figure out why someone as put together as Louisa would fall for and stay with somebody so goofy. And I can't even say young at heart because it's not young at heart. It's young minded, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggle with why she would be attracted to someone like that.
Right. There was a little clue that I did not catch until I already recorded the Doc Martin fan version of this episode. And Chris brought up an interesting point that I had not caught. But Louisa mentions couples counseling about how, I would have brought it up in couples counseling about how Sally has a sort of unhealthy relationship with her son and how kind of creepy it was. And it didn't even occur to me. I was trying to figure out, where did couples counseling come from? It's like, so Mark and Louisa were in couples counseling.
Or are they in it now?
I doubt they're in it now because they're not in a relationship anymore. But it sounds like they had been in some sort of couples counseling thing. So, Louisa might have been asking herself, why am I in this relationship with this guy? So that could explain a little bit of that. So, all right. So enough teasing. Martin and Louisa. Now, Doug, this has been something that you've been wanting to heat up for a while. Why don't you take the lead here?
Well, finally, are they going to make out or not? As per
Certainly the high
kids.
schoolers think so.
Right. Yeah, it's just so interesting that they're just going to deny it. And actually, one of the things that I look forward to seeing in the real Doc Martin is the parallel the same over there of come here, go away, go away, go away. I know you're not telling.
My lips are sealed.
So, they had several interactions with her illness, and he was clearly upset that she may still be with Mark, and then was clearly relieved when he diagnosed her out of that problem or
Yes.
issue.
Yes.
So, that was fun to watch. I mean, that was a central part of the episode. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. What did you think, Erica?
I mean, just move along, though.
Yes. How about you, Erica?
So we've talked about in other podcasts where we've had these big events. Somebody gets sick or injured, and then Doc Martin blows it up and he wants to cancel the event, and everyone's upset in town, and then he finds the diagnosis and now everyone's happy. And I thought this was going in the same direction, and I guess it kind of was, but it was Louisa that put her foot down and said, no, you're not doing this. You already canceled. You tried to cancel the Bean Festival. You tried to cancel all this stuff. You're not doing it. This one I refuse. And I don't know that anyone else would have stood up to him like that because of the feelings she had for him, I felt
Yeah.
she felt safe enough to make that call.
Yeah. But
And then
she
on the flip
fired him
side,
as her doctor when she did that. She says, you're not
she
my
did.
doctor anymore.
She did. But then we also have the great moment where he did the same and stood up against his fear to get to her to make sure she was safe. And
Yeah.
that was huge considering how we've seen him react to blood and such. Here he is knowing it's fake. And you hear him say it's just corn syrup and red dye 40, corn syrup and red dye 40.
Yes.
But he's clearly having a hard time and he pushes through to make sure to get to her. That's a pretty bold move. That's
Yes.
a Romeo and
Yes.
Juliet moment.
And they heated up the whole episode because it starts with the two of them reading articles in the newspaper about one another, right? So you can see this little interest going, right? And then they have each other in their phones because they show that, right? And I almost was wondering whether Martin had a special ringtone when she called because it sounded a little
It
different.
it did seem a little different, and
Yeah.
along the lines of telephones, I loved the message he left for her. It brought me back, well, let's just say a bunch of years, I won't say how many years, to high school when I was trying to get a first date and leaving a message for someone, and it was awkward.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a very funny scene.
Agree.
Martin Best, Dr. Best. And you can tell he feels like an idiot at the end when he just sits back and he's like, oh, right?
We've
And then
all been there.
we've all been there. The high schoolers noticed the two of them having this attraction, right?
Yeah, they sure did. They were all over that.
Yep.
And then even as they were walking away, they confirmed it. They kinda looked at each other like, "I got that right, right?" Like,
Yes.
you all saw that,
Yes.
Yeah.
And Aunt Sarah says, you two are in love.
right? And she said, "He has a chance."
Yes. Yeah. I thoroughly enjoyed, and I want to see what you guys thought about it. After they're both on the stretchers and Martin, bops up off the stretcher and goes to see her. They have this conversation, right? And the words that should be coming out are not the words that are coming out, right?
I want to be your doctor. I want you to be my doctor. Okay, I'm your
Yes.
doctor. It's very adorable.
It is very adorable. And then the whole Louisa, I just wanted to tell you that you have hematomacrosis.
Yeah.
It's not how much I care about you. It's you have this disease. So, yeah. So an interesting disease.
Definitely.
So I don't
I will
want to.
throw myself out there and say I actually have hematomacrosis.
How about that?
Yeah, it is a genetic disorder. There's two levels. You can either have both parents have the gene and give it to you, which is called hereditary. I only have one gene. Let me tell you, that put a big guilt trip on my mom because she got tested and she's the one that was the carrier. I totally blame her. I was interested, though, in this part of it when I heard what he diagnosed her with. In fact, the funniest part about the whole thing is vitamin C actually helps draw out iron from beverages that you drink. So it's one beverage and vitamin you are supposed to avoid at all costs. So the fact that she had, I mean, I believe they put in the craving for orange juice to lead you to think she was pregnant, but they could have chosen almost any other beverage to make it a little more realistic.
Right.
I've never been prone to fits of laughing, crying, emotional instability. And the only other thing I will say is that I do have to do bloodletting. I go once every 2 to 4 months, depending on what my levels are. If you were to go once a week, you would probably be dead pretty quickly. And I only go for about like 10 to 15 minutes, and that's about 4 pints of blood, and it takes at least 3 to 4 weeks for me to regenerate that blood.
Yeah.
So if he's going
Wow.
for 6 minutes every week, that's like all your blood's never gonna regenerate.
Well, that could be a 30-minute appointment. Like, you show up
Correct.
and we set you up and then we patch you up. Who knows?
But the 100% accurate thing they did say is there's literally zero you can do for hematochromatosis other than bloodletting.
I think I mentioned to you guys before that in England, they have to get the medical stuff right when they have a TV show.
Yeah, right. You mentioned that.
And so I looked it up and I was like, I'm not sure if this is right. So this was helpful because the answer is no.
And it wouldn't be something that you would just one day over 2, 3 days wake up and go gray and start craving vitamin C and giggling and having hormone fluctuations and passing out. This is like a buildup over time.
Is
And
fainting part of it at all?
I've never fainted, but they
Yeah.
did say her family has a history of fainting, so
Mhm.
perhaps some of the symptoms might be just to have misled us to think she might be pregnant.
Could be.
I don't know. But most of the symptoms that led him to the diagnosis have no connection to being diagnosed with hematomacrosis. In fact, most people don't even know they have it until they get like a blood panel, and then you have to take a genetic test to confirm.
Okay.
So that was a little far-fetched, but as somebody with has it, I got it, but as someone that hasn't, Doug, I'd love your point of view. I mean, was it plausible? Did you buy the whole thing?
Well, it was interesting. Michelle just happened to be when he had the whiteboard up and he was looking at the symptoms before he wrote down pregnant. She looked at the symptoms. Oh, she's pregnant.
Yeah.
It was it was like, yeah, you're right. I mean, that sounds like it could be it.
Yeah.
But that was interesting. I mean, I like, I like the doctor part, although I'm very disappointed to hear that this is not sticking to the truth. But I do like, he's a scientist doctor and very thorough. And so I tip my hat to that. He's always making unpopular decisions for the good of the community. So I think that's cool.
So he gets his fake facts right,
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
and he's very good at diagnosing things based on his script,
Yeah, right.
which is good. We need a good doctor like that.
Perhaps the writers, and it might be something I just didn't pick up on because I was so honed in once he said hematomacrosis. She did actually have a lot of the symptoms of the allergy,
Mhm.
which because she did have a lot of the same symptoms as everybody else, which were not symptoms of hematomacrosis.
Mhm.
So perhaps the writers were more focused on the allergy symptoms that got Doc Martin started into looking at what her other issues were.
Yeah, because she had the rash, the cough.
The
Yeah,
cough.
right.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why but I'm scrutinizing it because I have it. If you don't
Right.
have it, you wouldn't have scrutinized that.
Yeah. You're not going to look at it with that really clinical eye when you really don't know what the thing's all about. I thought it was adorable at the end when he was saying, I want to be your doctor. And it's like, he's not saying doctor. You know what he's saying there. It's like, I want to be your
Yeah.
partner or your date or whatever.
Well, and then Elaine said it when they booked, when he said Louisa had to come in once a week it'll be about 30 minutes for bloodletting. And I think it was Elaine was the one that said, "Oh, it's a date." And they're like,
Yes. Yeah. And then what does he do when he gets up?
And knocks over all the
"Yeah,
right.
So I take it you're going to keep watching.
Oh, most
I'm
definitely.
I'm
Very
still
good.
in. Still in."
For me, 2 more episodes till we get to Martin Ellingham or Martin Clunes. To all of us Doc Martin people who are, purists, it's like Doc Martin, but he won't have that name. It should be very interesting. But
Do
hey,
we know anything about that episode other than, that he's a father's going to appear?
that he's Robert Best. He's also a doctor. He's Martin's father. I have a sense that maybe his mother's going to be on too, although I don't recall the actress that they have playing her. And at one point early on, they said something like he makes Martin look like the warm and fuzzy one. And so I don't know what that really means, because to me Martin's getting warmer and fuzzier by the episode.
Yeah,
I agree.
agreed.
So I don't know what it means for him to be not warm and fuzzy. He could just be like Martin was on episode 1, some sort of standoffish for all we know. But I would say that the 2 actors are only about 10 years apart. So we'll see how they make this father-son relationship thing work.
Gonna have to
Maybe
make him look older.
maybe they'll make him not just standoffish, but like gruff and like maybe mean or rude even.
Could be.
Arrogant. Maybe I should say arrogant would probably be a better word. I wonder
Mhm.
if they'll make him more arrogant, which would be less likable and would make Martin's gruffness seem a little bit more softer, or
Mhm.
understandable.
Yeah. I'm most interested in finding out just what the relationship is between them, because, we have that little piece of information from episode 1 where Aunt Sarah is angry at her brother, Martin's father. But doesn't say why. And you have the sense that Martin got parked with Aunt Sarah after the accident with Rosemary. And we don't know if that's because the parents needed time to grieve on their own and just couldn't really manage their other child, or we don't know anything about what happened with that accident. So I've been really curious. I don't know if they'll get into that, if they'll tell us about it. I hope we learn more about the accident and the relationship that the parents have with their son.
Yeah, I would think it would be an opportunity to build that out, to
Yeah.
build out that part of him that we don't know about yet.
Yeah. I mean, I believe that the actor, Martin Clunes, I think he's only in this season in one episode. Maybe he comes back and we see him more in future future seasons. The word on the street regarding renewal is that it's looking favorable. I have not seen a definitive statement yet from Fox or the people who create this, but some of the press pieces or something, a thing called Deadline seems to be saying that no reason it shouldn't be, kind of, and it looks like it should be a lock, but they're just theorizing, so I don't know for sure, but it's looking good. We're hopeful. I'd like to see it go on.
Yeah, this better go to another episode. I got too much invested here.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
right.
another season.
Another season. See, I don't know what I'm going to do with you guys. If you watch any Doc Martin after this, I might have to, boot you off this panel because, then you're not unspoiled anymore, right?
We can do another year of this, and then we'll watch Doc Martin.
Okay, yeah.
I'll put that on my retirement list.
There, I'll leave it up to you, because I can tell you without really letting a lot out of the bag, but if I were to tell you don't watch beyond season 1 of Doc Martin or season 2 of Doc Martin and you'll be okay, I'd be lying to you, because they appear to be pulling bits and pieces out of multiple seasons without, so at this point, Doc Martin people they're not saying, I remember this episode. Like the very first episode of Best Medicine was practically duplicated. And then now it's actually pleasant in a way, the way that they're pulling little bits and pieces from the show in creative ways that are just fun to see rather than distracting. So, but I can't tell you, where to stop in Doc Martin without knowing something, because you could find something out all over the place.
Well, at least they have enough of this season going that if they do create a second season, they can hopefully break some of the negative patterns that people are pointing out.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I hope so. And like we've been talking about, everything's planned around a festival. It's just that there's many things that happen in a town that you can build a TV episode around.
Maybe it would be nice to have a somewhat of a timeline added, because we're only seeing episode to episode. How long has it been since we started? Was
Yeah.
the Baked Bean Festival 3 months ago? Or was it 3 weeks ago?
Right. Yeah.
How often do these events happen?
Yeah, I agree, because, maybe there is a big chunk of time between each of these things, and it just seems compressed because we're watching one every week.
The weather hasn't seemed to change.
Yeah.
Point.
Right. Is it spring? It's spring, summer, or fall, but I'm not sure which direction it's going.
It's just another beautiful day in Port Went.
Yes, it's always beautiful sailing weather.
Yes. And no sailing. I'm sorry, Doug.
Yeah, that's a shame. They're missing out on a niche. He needs to buy a boat.
He needs to buy a boat.
He's
Whether or
a
not he
doctor.
buys a
How
boat,
could-
they should have sailing episodes. They're in a sailing place. They've got lobster people, it's a fishing community. Lots you can do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we should provide that as input.
Yes. We'll write to them. Cool. Well, as always, I thank you guys for your time. Reminder to everybody who's watching, if you like it, and subscribe to the feed. Put comments in. Let us know what's working for you. And we'll see you guys next week. Glad you're going to keep watching.
So long.
It's time for my Best Medicine only people to drop, because you do not want to hear the Doc Martin spoilers that we have coming up. There are a lot of them. So if you're a Best Medicine only person, now's the time to leave this episode of the podcast, and we'll see you next time. Remember to like the episode, subscribe to the feed. If you have comments, please drop them into the comment section on whatever podcast platform that you use. This is my final warning. It's time for our Doc Martin fan portion to discuss Best Medicine Season 1, Episode 7, There Might Be Blood. Welcome to two people we've seen before, but not together, Chris and Kathy. Come through and welcome back to Podcast Port Went. So hello. Hello there, Chesla.
Hello,
Good to see you, Kathy.
Chesla.
Good to see you, Chris.
Kathy.
Welcome
Good to
back.
be here.
So we watched this Episode 7. How about an overall impression from Kathy?
Oh, I liked this episode a lot.
I mean, I still could have used just a little bit less of the sheriff, but I loved Elaine. She really had the doc's back. She was trying to take care of him, and she
Mhm.
was not on her podcast or her whatever it is that she does. And I just thought, and I liked Sally, which, she's really easy to like.
Mhm.
I didn't care for the storyline with the
Salty breeze.
Salty
Salty
Breeze?
Breeze. I felt like that was a filler. Really, I mean, I
Hmm.
know he was trying to get people to come because he told them that the writer was coming, and that was he just does things he shouldn't do sometimes, and then George has to sweep up after him. Um, the docs seemed to hold it together with the blood issue, I thought, pretty well, and it's because he knew it wasn't real blood.
Mhm.
But I really liked Elaine this episode. It's interesting if I'm just talking about the episode, I'm not ready for the Doc and Louisa to be an item yet.
A little early, huh?
I think it's too
Mhm.
soon, but
Hmm.
that's just me, maybe. Maybe they're going to carry it off somewhere else. As a
Hmm.
current Doc Martin fan, I can't help but notice all the little Easter eggs that they throw in there.
Hmm.
They bothered me in the first episode. It really drove me crazy, all the things. It was sort of almost like they were trying to use the same storylines, but not quite. But here it's just they're throwing them in gently.
Mhm.
They're just sort of tangentially there.
Mine is very similar to Kathy's, actually. I like the episode. I'm not sure if this is my favorite episode of the series so far, but
Hmm.
it's close. But it seems more, I'll say more organic, that it seems more like a complete thing as opposed to pieces being added together to try and make something. This was more, it seemed to flow more. And there was an bringing in Elaine's podcast. That's when the doc heard her in the bathroom. She was talking to somebody, and then he surprises her, and she's like got blood coming down her mouth.
Yeah, she made an instructional YouTube video, right?
Right.
Yes, right. So that element is still in there, but I was pleased to see that they sort of minimized it
Mhm.
as
Yes.
opposed to making something that sort of takes up the whole waiting room or takes up a lot of time. Mark, at the beginning of the episode, I thought he was um, a little much, but towards the end, I think he seemed a little more human, and I thought he was coming into be more of a human as opposed to a caricature. His although yeah. Uh, as he was talking with Louisa and their characters and how they're supposed to be playing and how similar it was to their real life experience that she's not into him, but he's very much into her. So that's very, given the situation, would you could understand him being a little taken with that, a little upset with that maybe, but of course he's sort of all over that.
I also liked the idea that, it did seem more like there was a through line for the whole story and everything was wrapped around that and contributed to that, but they were also doing, I would say, character development along the
Mhm.
lines, which is
Yes.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, things that didn't really seem to have much to do with the story as it was unfolding, but give you hooks or at least an idea that something could become of it later. The interaction of Aunt Sarah with Frank at the beginning. He was in the children's version of House of Blood or Blood Factory. So there was some interaction there. And then her interactions with Eddie, the woodpecker. Uh, it's just very minor interactions and could lead to something more in later episodes.
Yeah. And that's actually a good introduction to an Easter egg there, right? When she's talking to Frank.
Hmm,
Kathy, did you notice that one? That I think that's the guy who was talking about her lobster license or something.
Oh, yes. Very much like Aunt Joan
Joan.
not being able to cover the insurance on her truck.
Sort of a general comment. It's we're starting to see more and more of the characters, and we start to get more interested and involved with them. But the show is getting a little formulaic, that they have this festival, this event that covers everybody in the town is getting involved. You could get the townspeople involved in just sort of day-to-day activities as they go through their lives. We don't have to see them all gathered together for one sort of town-wide event.
I had been thinking the same thing before I even watched this episode. It's like they're all centered, all the episodes kind of are centered around some kind of town event or competition or something.
At least 4, because we've had the baked bean thing, the
Mhm.
Blaze Day,
Mm.
the
Baseball game.
oh, right, so at least 5, the baseball
Mm.
game.
The
Last week
Blueberry
it was
Festival.
the Blueberry Festival, and this week was the Blood
Red Festival.
Factory.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's 5 out of 7. That is quite a lot. But if you think about it, I was thinking about this because I was responding to somebody on Facebook on one of the Best Medicine pages.
Mhm.
You know, if I look at my own town, and if you see these things as separate events, so the baked bean thing was something that they did at the local bistro once a month, right? So sort of a
Mhm.
town get together. That's a little unusual. Not a lot of towns have that. But baseball game, pretty common. A festival, like an annual festival, pretty common. Fundraiser for the school, which is what
Mhm.
the Blood Factory was. Now, it's an odd
Mhm.
one, but they apparently had a horror.
It's literature, sort of.
Exactly. It's there's a local author who wrote a
Yes.
book, and so
Mhm.
they sort of celebrate him. So that's
Mhm.
unusual, but a fundraiser for
Mhm.
the school is not an unusual thing. Blaze Day
Mhm.
is a little weird. We don't have a Blaze Day,
Oh, yeah.
right?
That's weird.
Yeah. But
Well, that really, I guess it was an annual event, but that mainly was the women taking part in.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. And that
Yeah,
was
in my own town, we have, we have a Halloween Day parade, we have a 4th of July
Mm.
parade, we have a St. Patrick's Day parade, we have
Mhm.
another parade that commemorates the Scottish heritage of the whole town, and it's a big deal. It's
Mhm.
not unusual.
yeah. It's just that in this particular case, they're wrapping a whole TV series around all these things, and they're ignoring the fact that life goes on just in general. But
Yes.
if they have, you know, 13 episodes in this season, and the rumor mill says they're hoping for 5 seasons, what's that?
Yeah.
What, do my math. 13 times 5, 5, 3, 65
That's
episodes.
65.
They'll have to do a lot more than just have festivals. So how about some little, you had mentioned little Easter eggs, Kathy. What did you remember from
Well,
Doc
I remember
Martin?
Louisa's eventual diagnosis of, tell me if I'm getting this right, hemochromatosis?
Hemochromatosis, yes.
Right, which is what one of Doc Martin's patients had, Lorna, the
Okay.
woman who gathered the detritus off of the beach to make jewelry. Aunt Sarah's bad back, which
Hmm.
is similar to Aunt Joan's bad back.
Yep. Of course, Louisa had anemia, right? She didn't have the hemochromatosis.
Louisa and Doc Martin had
Yep.
anemia,
Hmm.
yes, but they both had something that
Right.
wasn't quite right, and both Louisas tended to faint.
Hmm.
And I
Mm.
remember in Best Medicine, the doctor asked Louisa, "Well, have you eaten anything today?" And she goes, "Oh, I didn't have time."
Hmm.
And the same thing when Louisa Lassen fainted in Doc Martin. He said, "Well, what did you have to eat today?" "Just a cup of tea."
Right.
He's like, "Why do you think you fainted?"
That's right. Yep. Yep. This
Mm.
has a lot to do with it, right?
They've gotten to the point where they pick up little tidbits of the Doc Martens episodes, not necessarily the same episode, but just little bits from here and there,
Hmm.
and they put it in, and it feels like, I think Chris just said, organic. It seems to be right. It fits in with the
Mhm.
storyline,
Hmm.
Yeah.
even though it does for those of us who are Doc Martin fans, we are like, "Oh, yeah, I remember that. Oh,
Hmm.
isn't that interesting? Yes, I remember that."
Mm.
So, it makes it more fun.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's a nice little it's Easter egg is a great way to term it. And if it's just something that's hidden, that you may or may not recognize, but it's hidden on purpose so that you can find it.
Well, that's like in Doc Martin, one of the very first things I found was Stuart James, the forest ranger, with his friend Antony, with the giant squirrel. Well, that was like James Stewart with his giant rabbit.
Yep.
So, it was that's an Easter egg.
Right.
Mm.
Yep.
Those who aren't familiar with the term.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. And I don't know if people know this, but at least back in the day, hidden inside of Microsoft Excel was a flight simulator that you could actually trigger with a bunch of specific keystrokes that you would do in order. So look that up on the internet. It may still be in there. Now, one Easter egg that I noticed was when Louisa, she declares that she wants to go to another doctor instead of Martin. And I believe in the original series, that is when she's pregnant?
He asks her, could you be pregnant? How
But I
could I
mean,
be
in Doc Martin, doesn't she
in Doc
choose
Martin?
to go to?
She said, maybe I should go to another doctor. And he goes, well, it's your decision.
Yeah,
It's always my decision.
that's right. And here, I think she doesn't like the fact that he wants her to undress for an exam because she does rush out of his office, but she doesn't, quote unquote, fire him until he threatens to shut down the school fundraiser. And
Right.
then that's when she's like, I'm choosing
Yeah.
another doctor. If it's Legionnaire's disease and it's caused by something environmental, it makes perfect sense to close it. But then it
Oh, yeah.
didn't end up being that, so he didn't actually shut it down. So,
But again, he was trying to find out. He recognized all these different symptoms, and they led him to Legionnaire's disease. It's kind of like when Martin Ellingham was diagnosing the bad water.
yeah,
He didn't want people to drink the water
Yeah.
because it was making everyone sick.
right.
He turned out to be wrong, just like Dr. Best turned out to be wrong. But
Mhm.
And as if I recall that correctly in Doc Martin, it came back to people who had tea at the surgery.
But that only explained
that,
part of the problem.
Mm.
It
that
actually was Bert filling water out of the river next to his house, which was downstream from where sheep were
Mm.
pastured,
Mm.
and selling
right.
that bottled water. Yeah. But he never threw
Okay.
Bert under the bus on that. Did you notice that?
No, he did
Yes.
not.
Mhm.
No,
Yeah.
he's always very
Right.
discreet.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. That was a season 1 issue, and he was a kinder, gentler Martin Ellingham in that season.
Somewhat, yes.
Yes. Yes.
Whereas Dr. Best is, I still think he's fairly kind.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not
Mm.
sweet, but he's kind.
I did enjoy the phone conversation or the message that Dr. Best left or tried to leave with Louisa.
About her rash,
It was
Right.
so awkward.
On the front part of her body, something like that. Yeah, so he's awkward. So obviously he has some emotions there that are interfering with his normal, rational leaving a message for a patient. So I don't recall if Martin Ellingham had any similar experience, but it's funny between the two Martins. Martin Best is more like a normal person. And so you
yes.
can see some of his emotions on the outside. I mean, he
Mhm.
stands as he's leaving this message, then he sits, then he stands up again. And he's not really sure what's going on. Martin Ellingham just is everything is inside. And you can tell that he's having some thoughts or some emotions, but they don't really rise to the surface. They're sort of there, and you can see what he's thinking from maybe a small expression in the eyes or where he looks or a grimace, something like
Mhm.
that. Most of that's all inside of him. So it's a little bit of difference between the two Martins.
Yeah.
He's a
And-
very, very subtle actor. Yes.
Yes.
But he did one time call Louisa when she was in Spain to try to get her to come home. And when he
Mhm.
ended the phone call, this is Martin Ellingham, obviously. It's like she
Yes.
wouldn't know who he was.
Yes. Yes.
It was just funny.
Mhm.
And I had to chuckle at that when I saw that in the original because a certain person who is on this panel of people we're talking to today has a tendency when he calls to leave message saying, "Hello, Chessa. This is Chris Olszewski, your husband."
I think it's important to identify who you are on a call when you're
Yep.
leaving a message.
Yes. Yes.
So
Maybe you know several Chris's.
Right. Exactly.
exactly.
Could be anybody, you know?
Right.
Could be anybody. Yes.
I caught a couple of things that I'm probably reading way too much into this show, but when Sally holds up Dr. Reese's lab coat for Martin to play the mad professor or whatever, she talks about it has a distinctive tang, or that Dr. Reese had a distinctive tang towards the end. And since it was Sally, who's Mrs. Tischel, it made me think back to when Martin gets kissed by her towards the end of the series. And yeah, and he says something like, there was a distinctive tang, right?
Was that with the mistletoe?
It was when she had gourd, which in the U.S. is GERD, and he detected that she basically has acid reflux.
He has a very sensitive sense of smell.
Yes, he does.
And taste.
Yes. And then I thought when Sally has Louisa in her store, she has what I would call sort of like the "we're closed when she's not" type conversation, which we saw numerous times in the original Doc Martin, where she says she's closed for stock taking at odd times of day, or, we're closed. No, you're not. So it was a nice little hat tip to that.
Yes.
What did you think of the ending when Martin is talking to Louisa on the stretcher and they're just having this sort of conversation of what's said and not said?
I want to be your doctor.
I'm her doctor. I'm her doctor. He kept saying, I'm her doctor.
Yeah.
Just in case no one caught that.
But didn't it feel like that whole conversation? He's like, Louisa, I just wanted to tell you, right? You have hematomacrosis. And it's like, you know that what we're all wanting him to say is, I wanted to tell you how much I cared or something like that. But no, it's just this medical stuff. And then his demeanor outside the ambulance was very much I'm her boyfriend rather than I'm her doctor.
But he was saying, I'm her doctor.
Yes.
And the three kids who follow him around and say, yeah, they're definitely going to do it.
Yeah.
They're definitely a couple.
Yeah.
But they really like each other. And they were still seeing.
Yep.
And he's not hiding it very well.
Aunt Sarah sees it too, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you two are in love.
So they did actually kiss last episode.
Well,
yes.
She kissed him.
She kissed him. Yes.
In the blueberry episode.
In the blueberry episode.
Yes. Took him right by surprise.
Right. After he cheered for her having the best blueberry pie.
Right.
Yes.
Now, if we were comparing this to episode by episode Doc Martin, right, we would be on the first episode of season 2, because this is episode 7. So when we were in episode 6 of Doc Martin, that was the end of season 1, and that was after the Peter Cronk surgery.
Right.
So we did have a kiss by episode 6.
Yes. And it may have been the most passionate kiss of the entire show. There in the taxi.
That's true. That's true. Do you remember what else happened in there?
In the taxi? Oh, yeah. Yeah. He's looking at her and she goes, what is it? Tell me. Tell me. Oh, it's nothing. Tell me. Tell me. I was just wondering if you had a regular dental hygiene program.
Yes. Are you telling me I have bad breath, Martin?
And out the door he goes. He's not in the taxi anymore.
Yep. So if you figure by episode 7 of Best Medicine, all we've got is sort of a little surprise peck from Louisa. So it's moves fast, but it's not maybe as fast as Doc Martin.
I hadn't thought about that because, it seems like it's moving very fast. The relationship is moving very fast, but you're right. It's not really compared to Doc Martin.
Yeah, episode by episode, at least.
Right. Of course, season 2, episode 1 is a very interesting episode in Doc Martin. So we'll see if they go there. It had the couple who were Eddie Ricks kept getting injured. And, I don't want to mess it up for anybody who hasn't ever seen Doc Martin because that's one of my favorite episodes.
But that's okay because this is the Doc Martin segment. And if there's somebody listening to this, they've been warned that there will be spoilers.
Yeah, so that was when they were at Eddie and his wife, I can't remember her name. They were into S&M and, there hadn't been a spark and now there's a spark.
Yes. That is a hilarious episode.
It really is.
So.
One of my favorites.
I did have something that sort of occurred to me. It was a little unclear where it came from. When Louisa is in Sally's pharmacy and she's leaving, and she says something about couples therapy. And I was trying to figure out where that came from.
Well, she was saying that Sally and Mark had they had an inappropriate relationship, or
And
maybe it was a little bit too close.
yeah, sort of an unusual relationship. Right.
And I didn't get the couples therapy reference, but then I thought about it. It was probably she and
Mhm.
Mark would do couples therapy.
Exactly. Yeah. So it would have, right.
She would have
So,
mentioned it.
well, it sounds like had been in couples therapy.
Maybe.
So, and this is where that would have come up.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. So maybe we just learned a little something here.
yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
I
Took
mean, I
me a
was
while.
trying to think of, was Louisa and Sally, are they in
Mm.
couples? But that didn't make sense. So,
No, no. Where did this rank, Kathy, with the 7 episodes you've seen so far? How do you like this one?
I think this was my favorite. And then the blueberry episode was my next favorite. And the other 3 or 4 or 5, I could take or leave. I would probably watch these 2 again. I doubt that I would ever watch the first episode ever again,
Hmm.
and I wouldn't watch the Blaze episode again. But some of them are okay, but these 2, those 6 and 7, I really liked.
Okay.
and yeah, they seemed more of a piece, a whole thing.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think there was one of the early episodes, I think it was 3. Yeah, I think it was 3 that I really liked.
Hmm.
So those show, I think, much of the potential that this series has. So,
Which
and this
one
one
was
I think comes close to it.
which one was 3?
I don't
Mm.
remember what 3 was, but I had the same impression of Chris in the sense that 1 and 2, it felt like Mark and Elaine were very over the top, and in 3, they weren't as over the top. So even though the plot's not coming to me, I kind of felt like from a character portrayal perspective that if they would go a little bit more along those lines, I could see that this could really be a lot of fun for a show.
Mm.
Yeah, it's gradually settling into itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think is 3 the episode where the bully comes
Oh,
in from
Could
the
be.
past.
Yeah.
So
could be.
Yeah, we haven't
if
seen him. We saw him in 2 episodes. We
no,
saw him there and then in the baseball one, and we
mm,
haven't seen him since. He'll
mhm,
probably his head'll probably pop up at some point, one would think,
mhm,
because 'cause he's got the goods on Martin.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
Yes. Or he's got something on Martin.
yeah.
mm,
I'm not sure
'Cause
what.
sounds like he
mm,
talked to the hospital where he had the freeze up.
mm,
But I agree,
uh,
this one was my favorite, I think, of all of them so far.
yeah, and I think we could see more of the residents of the village interacting with each other, just doing normal things, not
Mhm,
necessarily having a big event that draws them all together. The sessions, is it in a tackle shop where Sarah is interacting with Eddie?
mhm,
It looked like a tackle shop. So, yeah, so see them do things like that.
right. And just putting the blood festival together, everybody was just working together on constructing the site and practicing
Mhm,
their screaming.
mhm.
Yeah, the people seemed like they were just interacting as human beings and not over the top
Mm.
people.
Yeah,
Except for the
this,
3 teenagers.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And Peter complaining about the teenagers screaming and he couldn't sleep.
Hmm.
Mm,
They're making more out of the teenagers here than they made out of the Bevy girls and Doc Martin. They were just,
yeah.
periodic annoyances.
They were the Greek chorus.
Yeah,
Tosser.
They would throw out annoying things, but they would be relevant to whatever was going on.
and they would
Maybe
come and they would quickly go.
yes.
We never knew their names really, unless they had a health
No,
problem.
But
exactly.
these guys they're mean,
Yeah.
at least in the blueberry
Mm,
episode, they were really mean to the doc.
yeah,
I would
they're,
say they're kind of mean in Doc Martin, though, aren't they?
Well, they
yeah,
say nasty things,
Yeah.
yes.
yeah, to me, they're like thoughtless teenagers. So, which, yeah, a little mean.
Yep.
But
Good.
I think there's something beyond meanness. Getting back to the Al and Elaine storyline. It was funny that Elaine is telling Al when they're tied up face to face that, this is not going to go anywhere. I told you at the beginning, I'm getting out of Port Wen.
Mhm.
Don't get too close to me. And then starts kissing him.
Yeah. Yeah, and Kathy, I'm sure you could tell, like I did, like you knew what was coming and you knew why.
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, it's funny. Al always had a thing for the doc's receptionist.
True.
But in this particular scene, you could tell it was Elaine who was struggling with her attraction.
Oh, yes.
Because Al was like, yeah, you told me. I get it. I know. We've discussed this. But Elaine's the one who's like, it reminded me of something else. It reminds me of It's a Wonderful Life when George Bailey and Mary are, talking on the phone about plastics. And he's like, I don't want any plastics. I don't want any ground floors. Just,
Wainwright.
Yeah, he just wants to get out of town, but he's like, being drawn to Mary. And it really reminded me of that scene. I'll bet you that was intentional.
It probably was.
Yeah.
And
There's a lot of references to other shows.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that caught my attention, a little bit of slapstick. At the end, Louisa and Elaine are in Doc's office, and they're talking about the bloodletting, and she has to come back every week. And Elaine says, "Oh, sounds like a date." And they both like, "No," and then get up. And then Martin crashes into a table and sends things flying.
Yep.
So.
And then he's like, next patient. And for hearkening back to another story, Jeremy Gathercole, the horror writer, was actually played by Evan Handler, who was in Sex and the City. And Liz Tuccillo, who's one of the major players on Best Medicine, I think she wrote this episode and she was very involved in Sex and the City too. So there's a little back reference to that.
Yes, it was very interesting that Sally had that relationship. And he goes, I've been waiting for your call for 40 years.
I wonder what we'll hear about that if there's anything going forward,
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
That was really neat.
Yep.
And she saved Greg's bacon right there.
That's right. Yep. Cool. Well, I presume that we'll all keep watching.
That's the plan.
Very good. All right. I really appreciate you guys being here. Anybody out there who enjoyed this episode, I hope that you will like it online and you will subscribe to the feed. This is your community for Doc Martin and Best Medicine fans. We're just a bunch of people who have nothing to do with the show other than the fact that we enjoy it and like talking about it. So hopefully we'll see you next time. Thank you, guys. Thanks for joining Podcast Port Wen. Podcast Port Wen is an independent fan production, not affiliated with, endorsed by, or sponsored by Buffalo Pictures, ITV, Fox, or the creators of Doc Martin or Best Medicine.